after, but let's focus on Derek's straw poll first, because then we can talk about tools for that revisiting component and what that might look like. So,
Mr. Chair, I have a friendly amendment
you can talk
to a couple or few, Derek.
Is it friendly?
I think it's pretty friendly.
If you say it with a
I
smile.
think it's friendly for the city, too.
Just because you say it's friendly doesn't necessarily mean it is.
All right, Derek, you want to hear my friendly amendments?
Yes, I do. Of course
you're
I
okay
do.
with it? Okay. My first friendly amendment is that we keep the cap, but we move it to 50. Okay? My second friendly amendment is that we remove the boundary and we add that ADUs can go into local historic and national historic areas inside, not exterior. So basically, I'm kind of hijacking your straw poll because I'm changing it. It is.
That sounds like a friendly. Sounds like a friendly suggestion for a different straw poll.
I love revisiting the ADU. I don't care how long it is, but I think we need to have some sort of data analysis on it. And then the last one is. No, we'll leave it at that. You okay with that, Derek? So far, 50. You keep the boundary, and you allow you remove the boundary, but you say that ADUs can go in local historic districts and national historic districts inside, nothing exterior.
So you're talking about a path toward legalization for some of these existing illegal units.
Right.
Which is important, I think.
I think we have to make the distinction that those are two different things. That there may be illegal units anywhere in the city, and that the ADU ordinance is not designed to accommodate illegal units. Now, if they go through unit legalization and then apply for an ADU process, they might be able to do that.
It's possible that a unit that we do not recognize currently may not qualify for the unit legalization. That could go through the ADU process.
Okay, so that's the other distinction. It could go through ADU as well, but it would be required to come up to all the primary issue with legalization is whether or not it historically was allowed there, and is the building code requirements related to it.
And you want no boundaries anywhere, so that they're legal anywhere in the city. Forcing them on people who don't want them.
Not forcing.
Well, if they're available.
Well, no, you still have to go through the process.
Right.
Neighbors will be notified.
So, can I accept some of the friendly amendment?
Sure.
Okay.
You can do anything you want since it's your straw poll.
Oh man, you're really making me bend here. How about we keep the boundary forwarded by the Planning Commission for 3 years at least, and then change the cap to 75 per year.
Not per year. We can't do it per year. It's got to be a cap so that we can actually analyze and go over it.
So it's a revisit cap,
It
not a
is.
time cap? Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
it's a
The-
And
revisit
you're saying a
cap.
time cap?
Yeah, I would like to move forward with the proposal, my straw poll as I originally pitched, which was to keep the boundaries as forwarded by the Planning Commission, a removal of the cap, and revisiting the ADU ordinance in 3 years. I think the removal of the cap is important, especially after conversations that we've had with community members, as well as the professor at the university. I think we need to give this policy every opportunity to be successful in the short time period that we're giving it before we revisit. And I think putting an artificial cap is fudging the market, and I don't support that in anything. So I want to lift the cap and revisit in 3 years.
So, any questions to Derek straw poll?
Yes, what about the National and Local Historic District interior only piece? No, well, it was part of what,
I'm warm
James
to
just
that, but I'm
proposed.
worried about.
So what I would
I haven't heard anything from the community on that, so I'm
what I
not
would
willing to-
propose, Aaron, is that we straw poll that as well.
okay, I'm just checking.
yeah, I'm warm to it, but
Any other questions?
I don't like clumping them all together. That's my thing.
You don't like to lump all of
Yeah,
them?
I wish we had 3 straw polls here.
Okay, let's do 3 straw polls.
Do you want to do that? Okay, let's do that.
Well,
So we'll straw
some
poll your
indication.
items A, B, and C independently. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's what we'll do. We're moving forward. Does the council support adopting the ADU ordinance with the following changes? We'll straw poll these one at a time. Keeping the boundary forwarded by the planning commission. Thumbs up if you support that. Thumbs down if you do not. So we have 5-2. Aaron and James are dissenting. Same question. Straw polling, removing the annual cap of 25. Thumbs up if you support removing the cap. Thumbs down if you do not. We have James dissenting. Everybody is in support. And C, revisiting the ADU ordinance in 3 years. Thumbs up if you support that. Thumbs down if you do not. Okay, we're unanimous on that one. So I want to do a couple additional straw polls before we get to the ones below. Let's have a quick. This is what I would rather suggest, and council members, if you're okay with this, because we're getting short on time, there are a couple options for looking at how to request a follow-up in 3 years. Typically, we do a legislative intent. Sometimes those are really hard to enforce because the council needs to track those, and the administration doesn't necessarily have to respond specifically to that. Another option that I just floated for consideration was the possibility of sunsetting the ordinance in 3 years, which would require a revisit of it if you wanted to continue it. So I just wanted to throw that out and see if there was any interest in doing that. What I would suggest at this point, well, I see some nods. Do you want to straw poll that? Or?
The reason I do, we have 2 of you leaving in a month, and in another 2 years, we have another election. So we're putting this so far out that there's a good chance that the majority of us won't be here. And I think it's this important that we re-examine this as a body, whoever we are, in 3 years.
And I think as I leave, I want to make whoever follows me address ADUs just to share that little bit of misery and pain. So that's why I'm excited about it. Can we straw poll? Yes.
Can I just throw, if you put something in there that says we're going to revisit it in 3 years, it really means we're going to start revisiting it in like a year and a half, because it takes so long to do that work.
So what I would suggest is that we say we propose a sunset in 4 years, but I think it forces you to start having that conversation. Actually, in a 2 to 3 year timeline is a good timeline to have that conversation, I would think. Is that acceptable?
So you're saying 4?
I would say that as we move forward, we adopt this ordinance with a sunset in 4 years. Because what that does is if anyone wants to continue doing it, you have to start that conversation before it sunsets. Yeah.
So we would keep the legislative intent to revisit in 3 years, but sunset the policy in 4 years.
Absolutely. That's what I would say.
It feels long to me, and I have seen this body be okay with putting the brakes on something like impact fees, where we're just going to quit collecting money, folks, because we haven't talked about it yet. Like, we did that. That was crazy. And I could see where we did that. We voted differently on that issue, but I could see where we're busy and it just lapses and ADUs are locked up for a while. So 4 years feels like a really long time.
Well, keep in mind, though, that would be a sunset. It would expire and go away. Council can take other action at any time.
Well, and there is still the unanimous support for the legislative intent that the
Revisit it in 3
administration
years.
comes back in 3 years to revisit it anyway. So we have that. The 3 year thing is now on the record that we have to do. The sunset just means that if we don't do that in 3 years, then we risk losing the whole thing, which I don't anticipate happening.
Yeah,
So-
I don't either. It just is I think it's just a better mechanism for automatically triggering a review.
And if anything, Councilmember Mendenhall, it basically keeps us honest and forces us so that we have to revisit it, because if we don't, then it goes away.
Mr. Chair, can I ask what the administration thinks of the sunset?
I think that there's a lot of unintended consequences from it. basically anything that, any ADU that is permitted in that period before it would sunset, if the ordinance does sunset for whatever reason, becomes non-conforming and opens up a whole new set of potential issues and questions about what we can enforce with those existing units after that point in time. If the ordinance sunsets, we might have some legal issues there. So I'm a little bit hesitant to say what our stance is on that, just kind of on the spot like this. I think that we'd want to have some time to get some legal research and do
So what I would suggest is we need some time for the legislative intent, and we need to have legal review as sunset option. So let's not straw poll that today. Let's come back with that as an option for next week. Okay, let's quickly go on to a couple more straw polls.
Do you want me to?
Yes, Aaron, do you, can you?
Yeah.
I know you had a
This
couple.
actually, this was Derek's idea a while ago, that the city, we should do a budgetary component of this. Obviously, Nick Norris could probably tell us we could supply a lot of budget to support staffing, but Derek's idea was around the city creating some design plans that are free and accessible to the public, so that areas with perhaps less liquid funds who have the ability to do an ADU can save on the cost of design and engineering by accessing some of our plans that we produce here. We don't have a budget or a monetary number, but we could commit to addressing this in in the upcoming budget.
Can I thank you for adding a little bit of wind to that idea. I appreciate it. I would like to have this discussion in the context of the RDA and maybe look at it more like a pilot in one of our RDA districts on a really small scale, because we have different kind of money over there. And so, you know, I'm looking at our budget amendment right now, and what I'm saying is I would encourage us to maybe have that conversation later after we have a fully baked policy in front of us.
So what I would suggest is this language is not specific to a funding mechanism. So if you wanted to pursue that discussion, it could easily be assigned to the RDA for follow-up discussion. This would be, if you look at number 2 there, it's got several components of language that could be included in an intent. It doesn't say it has to be done a certain way.
Okay.
So I would say it's important to capture the intent, and you can talk about the mechanism for funding that as
Another
part
time.
of that future conversation. Does anyone object to any of those items that are there listed as language for consideration in the intent? Okay, then we're going to assume that one's,
Mr. Chair,
yes.
we're asking for more staff time essentially, right? From all these?
Research and provide, not a request for staff time, but
No, but
whether or not there should be staff time, yeah.
whether I guess my question is that we're asking more of the planning department on this, and we're not actually allocating any more money for their time to do it. Is that accurate to say?
This is my reading of a legislative intent. We're including language that says, planning department, at some point you need to come back to us with recommendations on these things. If you need additional staffing, we want to know what that might look like. If you need additional resources, we want to see what that might look like. We're not committing to that. We are asking the planning department to craft a response. That is a pretty common action of the council.
Do we have a time frame we're thinking about here?
We could propose a few, but generally we revisit our legislative intents every 6 months, just for review. Any other objections to that? Is it strong enough that you want to pull it out? Or let's straw poll it. All those who support the language under item number 2 for legislative intent indicate with a thumbs up. Any who oppose, thumbs down.
Jeez.
This is not
This is
putting
just
money.
asking.
It requires some staff. This is requiring some staff time. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
Talking about the entire 2, right?
I'm talking about what?
All of number 2.
All of number 2, legislative intent.
No, I don't feel comfortable with the city supplying ADU designs and plans for public to use. I don't think that's a city function. I think that that is a property owner's function. If they want to build an ADU, they should be required to do that.
It's based on some examples of other communities who are doing that, so.
I know. That's just my feeling is I don't agree with it.
We're not getting through legislative intent tonight. Sorry about that, Nick. Let's move on to item number 3, require an owner-occupied affidavit to be included in the ADU application. Those who support that.
Can I just make a quick comment?
You're not going to make any of this easy, are you, Nick?
This will be easy. It's not necessarily an affidavit. It's some sort of signed acknowledgement that they understand what the rules for the ADUs are, which it's generally implied on any land use application, but we can make sure that it's clear and if they sign something, but it's not really a legal
We want it notarized.
affidavit. So that's.
Why not?
I'll let the attorneys answer that question.
And if we
But-
want it notarized,
Well, can't you just require them to go and do a
Do
deed
we have an
restriction
attorney
on their own?
prepared? Do we have an attorney prepared to answer that question?
oh no.
And so I don't want to hear why we can't do it. I want to hear how you can make it happen legally. Yeah, you're not going to do that, are you?
No, I'm not really going to do that. So we're talking about a belt and suspenders kind of a thing here. The Knicks and I talked about this. An affidavit is not necessarily the right vehicle to do this. An affidavit is something where you're affirming facts that you have personal knowledge of, and it's typically submitted in a circumstance like court or where you have a fact finder. If you're seeking some sort of acknowledgement, yes, I agree with Nick Norris, this is implied when you submit an application for a land use development. Having to submit some sort of an acknowledgement for that when you're submitting the application in addition to that application is like submitting some kind of an acknowledgement every time you receive your paycheck that you will pay the government taxes on that. It's already required by the law to comply with what the regulations are. We did talk a little bit about this. We can bolster the application to be more robust and provide information to applicants as to exactly what they're required to comply with. Going with something that's notarized, that's difficult to justify.
Councilmember Mendenhall, I assumed that your intent was to ensure that the city is providing adequate notification to the applicant that this is a requirement. Is that accurate?
It's to try to give us more of a legal tooth in this when we find that there is an owner who no longer lives there and is now renting a duplex.
And is there a mechanism for doing that?
What about like a notice of interest from the city? They file, they just file it at the county recorder. Something to that, like a deed restriction saying this is actually an owner-occupied unit. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, a deed restriction would actually be something that
Has
would
teeth.
be a legitimate tool, yes.
Okay, so I want you to consider that and come back to us next week with a recommendation as to whether or not that will work.
Mr. Chair, I have another follow-up since that was brought up. My question is, do we have any idea from the county assessor what kind of increase on taxes this would be? Because now it becomes an income-producing property, is that not correct? Would they be assessed something differently, even though it's still considered a residential, single-family dwelling?
Could not answer that at this point in time, yeah.
I see some nodding. We might need a follow-up on that. That was raised actually by Jennifer Bruno, that if it's a licensed rental unit, is it a commercial property and is it assessed at a different rate?
And do they have to follow the good landlord program?
I'm sorry.
Do they have to follow the good landlord program?
That's an excellent question too. So we'll do follow-up with that. Nick, could you track that and make sure we get that information out? We have one more, well, I don't know if it's going to be a straw poll or not because so far I haven't been able to get one done. Only allowing interior ADUs in national and local historic districts. Aaron?
I have a question about that.
Yeah.
So since we just agreed to have boundaries, would that supersede the boundary part or not?
No, it probably would add properties currently in the boundary to a restriction. That
Okay.
would be my assumption.
Is that what you're thinking, Aaron, with that proposal?
No, I was thinking that the boundaries were going to go away, but some people changed their votes on that
Do you want this consideration to be that in all national or local historic districts, regardless of where they are in the city, that ADUs are only allowed in interior structures?
Would we need to go back
Well,
to the
that-
planning commission?
Can I make a comment on that? I don't
Yeah.
mean to derail this a little
You mean
bit.
to change the boundary? What are you talking about?
First, I don't think you'd have to go back to the planning commission because you're talking about the same regulation, like just modifying a regulation that was proposed that came through the planning commission. So I think you're okay. I think that there could be some problems with adding the national districts in there because the city really doesn't have a say over how or when those are created. That's up to the,
What about just the city?
the local ones. Absolutely, we have full control over that. But that may be, you know,
We'd have trouble enforcing on a national
Well,
recognized because we don't.
when we've tried to tie, in the past, when we've tried to tie local regulations to national historic districts, we've gotten some pushback from the state Historic Preservation Office, who really, you know, hasn't really liked that because they think that it starts mixing the two roles and it could be problematic.
So that's good advice. Thank you, Nick. So do you want to continue this consideration with local historic districts, which would accommodate some significant areas in the city?
Yes, I do.
So shall we put it forward for a straw poll? Do you have questions? Do you want to do it today? Do you want to leave this one till next week if you have follow-up questions?
The last one.
If we don't have questions, I'm doing it tonight. Okay, all those in favor of supporting the allowing ADUs in interior structures in local historic district, thumbs up.
I want to make sure that it is the main dwelling.
Part of
Just the
additional
main-
questions are people
not- I
having a
just-
hard time with.
I just wanted to say it's the main dwelling. It's not like an
That's my
outside
point.
shed. It's not anything like that. It is the main
That
dwelling
is
of the house.
that is correct. Is
For
we're
that
not talking we're
clarification.
talking about it's inside the structure.
Okay, and since we're clarifying things, I just want to clarify that that supporting this does not remove the boundary.
The other supporting comments.
Although
For
I'm open to that
questions.
friendly amendment.
You guys don't want dinner tonight, I can tell, and I'm okay with that. Ready? All those who support this, thumbs up. Any who oppose, thumbs down.
Oh, now there's boundaries.
We're unanimous. We unanimously support that. Okay, so that's an addition we need to make. All right, we will see this one more time next week. Nick, I'm pretty sure just one
Look
more
forward
time.
to it. We'll be good.
Don't lie.
More time and then again in a few years, right?
Yeah, and then again in a few years.
We've never stopped, so we might as well keep going.
All right. I apologize to those who have been anxiously waiting for board appointment interviews, but I know you have been thoroughly entertained by the inner workings of city government. We have on our list several recommendations for board appointments tonight. We'll consider Nicole Salazar. Nicole, are you here? Nicole is being considered for an appointment to the Human Rights Commission. Welcome, Nicole. Hello. I will ask you to take a few minutes and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about why you're interested in this board appointment.
Sure. I am an attorney in Salt Lake City, Utah. I've been licensed for 7 years. I've practiced primarily in Salt Lake. However, I represent clients throughout the state of Utah. In my former life, I was a social worker and worked in many capacities, working with children who are at risk of abuse, neglect, dependency, and people living with HIV. I also worked on generational drug studies right after I graduated from college. I have been interested in general social justice ever since I was in high school. I started the Amnesty International chapter at Judge when I was a senior in high school. It sadly died after I graduated, but I did continue that interest in Amnesty International through college. I wasn't able to keep it up after I came back to Salt Lake, but social justice has always been something that I have worked for my entire life, and knowing that it's not something you can just wish for, it's something you actively have to work at and seek out. In that capacity, I currently serve on several boards that work towards creating equality among socioeconomic statuses, among educational statuses, and gender equality. I currently serve on the board of Centro de la Familia de Utah, and they primarily serve children who are children of migrant farm workers in Head Start programs, and they are working at creating more of, getting back to their roots of working on grassroots, urban, at-risk youth programs. I got a little bit away from my social justice roots and now serving on the Rules of Evidence Committee for the Supreme Court of Utah, but in that capacity, we did just send a draft rule to the Supreme Court on lineups, police lineups, and the best way to conduct those police lineups, show-ups, and identifications through a photo lineup. So my interest does go to this, and I do serve on another statewide commission for child welfare for the Division of Child and Family Services, and local council, a local commission is something I've had on my mind for quite some time.
And you have time to do this?
Yeah, it's amazing what kind of time you find, yes, for all my many different interests. And I also I'm the vice chair of the Utah State Bar's Indian Law section. So I do serve on that one as well. I no longer serve on the Legal Aid Society, sadly. When I moved over to Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer, there's already a board member from Parsons on the board, so I was not able to keep that board membership. But I am still a huge supporter of legal aid. I make sure I fill at least 2 tables every year at their gala and collect donations and submit my own donations for their silent auctions.
Does anybody have any comments or questions for Nicole? I'm totally biased because I'm still upset with her for leaving the Utah AIDS Foundation years ago and becoming a lawyer. But I can only say glowing things about her. Any comments, questions? Yes, Derek.
Hi, Nicole.
Hi.
Congrats on your appointment, or nomination, I should say. Do you have any thoughts or ideas on how the commission might be a more engaged partner with the city on issues of being more inclusive or social justice, or how the city might make more and more effective outreach to minority communities?
Yeah, my understanding of how this commission works is that it can be as active as you really want it to be. And it sounds like there's some pretty eager commission members who want to make the city more inclusive of all groups, not just the marginalized, not just the minorities, but everybody, to make this an inclusive city that I think all of us really believe that Salt Lake City is and can be even more so. I have heard talks of implementing some of the CDAW articles into the city itself, and perhaps revising some of those, or at least reviewing some of the ordinances to make sure that they are in as much compliance as possible as we can under our restrictions. We have ordinances. We can't really conflict with state law as much, and realizing that the United States is only a signer to the CDAW, but I think we can do things like implementing as much of the CDAW as we possibly can, working on reviewing those ordinances to make sure they don't negatively impact any other minority groups or any other marginalized groups, people with disabilities, people who are refugees. Many of those ordinances were drafted at a time that we were not considering some of these secondary and tertiary effects. So I think there's certainly much that the Human Rights Commission can do to make it more inclusive. Part of it is just starting with the ordinances, but also I think creating an open dialogue with the council and with the mayor's office and seeing what we can do as a partnership to bring everyone together and to make these ordinances more effective.
Thank you for bringing up refugees, because this was what was really coloring my question to begin with. A number of folks in my family are refugees from the Middle East, and it's really important to me that we do a better job as a city at making outreach and creating a space for new Americans to step up and have their voice heard and feel free to express themselves. And so I would love to, assuming everything goes well for you this evening, I would love to engage with you and other commission members the mayor's office on how we might be able to make some inroads there.
Absolutely. I did work with refugee populations quite a bit, both at DCFS and at the AIDS Foundation. And again, when I became an attorney, when I represented parents who were accused of abuse and neglect, it was not uncommon for a parent to be a refugee and there be some major misunderstandings between the Division of Child and Family Services and how they like to do things and how a refugee family was doing things from their country. So I did work very closely with the Asian Association for quite some time in Catholic Community Services. And I have represented refugees in the past on a pro bono basis because of that very basic need to make sure that refugees can maintain their culture and can maintain their family units without as much interference from the state. As I think too often we like to impose our values and our culture on refugees without understanding what impact that has on their family. And I do have family members who are also refugees from various countries. So I do understand how that does play a major role in coming to the United States and being able to create a life here.
Any additional comments or questions for Nicole? Nicole, it's great to see you.
Good to see
Thank
you too,
you
Stan.
very much for your willingness to serve on this really important committee with the city. Your name is on our consent agenda for later this evening. You don't need to be present. We just want to extend our appreciation to you for your willingness to volunteer in this capacity. So thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Our next board appointment consideration is Ellen Reddick, who is being considered as an appointment to the Transportation Advisory Board. Ellen, welcome. And Ellen, could you take a few minutes as well and just talk a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in this particular board?
I am interested. I have been interested in this board since the first Foothill study 30 years ago. I find transportation fascinating. I find being a pedestrian invigorating and challenging. And I think we need to bring those two together and talk more about placing the pedestrian more in focus on providing safe and walkable neighborhoods. We talk about them, we need more of them. I serve on the board of Utah Transit Riders Union, Utah Moms for Clean Air, Congress for a New Urbanism, and I'm very involved and very aware of the needs of each of these people, including seniors, on access to transportation and the impact it has on each of those groups' lives.
Thank you, Ellen. Any questions or comments for Ellen?
Just a comment. Thank you very much for your willingness to do this. When you contacted me and said you were interested, I was thrilled because I do think that your interests are going to be a wonderful addition to this board. So thank you very much for your willingness to serve and your continued service in the community.
Thanks for your support.
Derek.
Thank you. I normally don't have this many comments on board appointments, but Ellen, thank you for your interest in this and all the city issues that you stay plugged into. But I would really appreciate if you could speak to multimodal transportation a little bit and thoughts on where the city might be able to improve. If you have any specific thoughts on the complete streets policy that we currently have in place, that would be important to me as we look to tighten that in the future.
I do. I really support complete streets, and I think we need it in many areas of our city. I think I think we need to educate more so people understand what complete streets is and how it gives everyone something. We focused too much on road diet. Road diet doesn't do anything but take away, and that's the perception of the average person. You're taking roads away from me, and you're giving me nothing back. And that's why we're failing when we're out in the community, because they don't understand that we really are taking something away. If we bury road diet forever and never talk about it, and talk about complete streets as we're going to narrow, increase safety, we're going to use 3D crosswalks, we're going to improve lighting, we're going to give you more safe places to cross, and we're going to educate the driver in that you are really important and that we will not run over you, and that if I am 3 blocks from a school, somewhere it's going to occur to me, I could possibly be in the middle of 1,000 children, and I possibly should slow down. I mean, we need to make the driver equally responsible. If you remember, a couple of months ago, a UPS driver was fined $260 for killing a woman in a crosswalk. And it was taken to a jury trial, and they asked the defending attorney what happened, and he said, people identify with someone that hit someone in the street. They all feel sympathy for that person, and they know it could be them next time. We have to change that perception to how sorry we feel for the driver, to taking responsibility, each of us, for making our streets safe for everybody. But it takes education, and it takes someone of. Let me give you another example. Remember when Redmond building in Sugar House was painted with graffiti? And Dee Dee held a press conference in front of it in her red suit, and she pointed to it and she said, "We will find you, and we will get you, and we will fine you for this. Don't come ever in my community and paint graffiti on a building." I mean, it takes the whole community to stand up and say, no, this is unacceptable. This is not, it doesn't meet our regulations, and we've raised the bar to where we're all responsible for the safety of everybody on our roads and our sidewalks. No, I'm not passionate about this at all.
I can't tell. James and then Lisa.
I'm just extremely excited for you to be doing this. I mean, you're so vocal in your in your input in your community and what's going on in Salt Lake City. It's just another venue for you to continue your great work. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Ellen, thank you so much for doing this. I echo what Charlie said, and I do believe you are a proud resident of District 7, and you live in a dangerous area because I run that area regularly. But thank you so much, and thank you for all the leadership you provided on the East Bench and in talking about the master plan and foothill traffic studies many, 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 many times. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Again, we appreciate your willingness to serve on this important advisory committee for the city. Your name is on our consent agenda. You do not need to be present. Later this evening, we'll be voting on that. Thank you. The next several appointments are for our Housing Trust Advisory Board. If I could ask Terry Lake, Ryan Parker, Beverly Lang to come up forward. And I'm sorry, Beverly, you're actually on a different board. So just sit right there. There you go. I apologize. I got over anxious. Welcome. And if each of you could take a minute and just talk a little bit about yourselves and your interest in this board.
Okay, my name is Terry Lake, and actually I was invited to be a member of the board because I have actually used the services of the city's low-income housing, and it's a passionate issue to me because I understand from the side of the person who can't afford housing what it's like to need that facilitation. I have a bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Utah, and I am a single mother. My son, though, he's grown up now, and I've lived in Salt Lake City for 24 years.
Thank you.
All right, hello, City Council. Thank you for having me. My name is Ryan Parker. I am a social worker, an advocate for those experiencing homelessness. I studied liberal arts at Utah Valley University before moving to downtown Salt Lake 3 years ago. And I'm just very excited to, be a part of this board in, regards to, helping address the affordable housing crisis that our city faces.
Thank you, Ryan. Any questions or comments for Terry or Ryan? Thanks.
You guys, question and comment?
Wow.
Here we go.
No, I'm okay with it. I'm nervous.
Easy. I could come up with a really tough question for you, but that's not going to happen tonight. Thank you both very much. You're on a consent agenda. We'll vote on you across the hall, but you don't need to be present. So thanks for your willingness to serve. Now, Beverly. Beverly's at Lang? Long. Okay, Beverly and Doug Thim. Doug, are you with us? Both Beverly and Doug have been recommended for appointments on the Board of Appeals and Examiners. Welcome. I think you might have figured out the routine here. And thank you for being patient with us this evening. Could you take a minute to introduce yourselves? Just talk a little bit about the...
My name's Beverly Long. I'm from Las Vegas.
Beverly, I need you to
closer.
pull that right up close to you. Yes, thanks.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm from Las Vegas. I went to school at UNLV in architecture, and I came up here to finish up at the U. Sorry. I started working with the federal government and have traveled around, and then I came and worked with the city. I was in the plans examining department, and I'm LEED certified, and now I'm back up with the federal government up at Hill Air Force Base. No, you didn't hear me?
I didn't hear you on that last part. I apologize. We're coordinating schedules here.
So what do you need?
Well, I'm Doug Tim. I've moved to Utah about 27 years ago with my family. I'm practicing architect. I am LEED accredited and maintain that with my 30 hours of continuing education every 2 years, which is always a joy.
I can tell you're overwhelmed by that excitement.
But I'm one of those who gets up every day, comes to work. I'm usually in the office about 6:30. I reside in Park City, actually. But I'm in Salt Lake probably for more than half of my life in terms of hours. And I get up every day, come to work, knowing I'm going to do something that I love. As far as why I might be interested or why I am interested in serving on a board, it's interesting because I have over my career have been, well, on this side of the podium, talking to council people and commissions, planning commissions, and various boards and that sort of thing. And several years ago, I was in a hearing that was going till like 11:30 at night, and I was looking at these people who were giving up all of their time to do something for their community. And I just felt like, you know what, I think I should give back. And so I actually serve on a commission in Park City. But, you know, I kind of regard Salt Lake as a big part of my existence, and I count it very important, my duty as an architect, to look out for the public safety and welfare of people in the built environment. And I think this might be a board where I can help contribute to that.
Thank you both very much. Any questions for Beverly or Doug? Yes, Lisa.
Thank you both, and don't think because we're not asking you a ton of questions there's anything wrong. We rarely ask as many questions as we've asked tonight, and you stand between us and dinner, so yeah. we appreciate your being here.
Actually, it's preferred by me, so.
Questions or comments? Thank you both very much for your willingness, and we'll be voting on you this evening, but you don't need to be present, and thank you.
Thank you.
Council members. That concludes our agenda items. I'm going to quickly have Cindy go through announcements since we're running a little late anyway.
Okay, you have received the draft request for information, RFI, for golf course management. You've received that so that you can give input if you would like, and you've also received an email reminder. So if you do have any feedback, please get it to council staff in the next day or two. And then we have 2 proposed legislative actions. I'm not sure if these have gone through our regular process, but I'll mention them, and you can tell me if they have. Usually would be 3 council members. First is the maximum allowable height of walls allowed through the special exception process in the Foothill zoning district. That's Councilmember Penfold. And then Councilmember Adams, a process to initiate, or looking at the process to initiate alley closures to correct a mathematical issue that makes it very difficult in some cases to get 80% when the numbers aren't divisible. Right, right. So I'm not sure if you had already gotten your 2 extra people. Okay.
And I haven't, so I apologize, but I'll make a shot at it really quickly. We have a special exception that was permitted in the Avenues foothill overlay zone for a retaining wall that's about 20 feet high, and it was done as a special exception for a sports court right down into a gully that is pretty open. It's open space, and so it's quite contrary to the original intent of the foothill overlay zone, which was to protect corridors and that sort of transitional natural area. So I asked if we could initiate a revisit of that provision that allows that. They didn't even comply to our standard retaining wall setbacks, where you have a certain requirement for so many feet of setback for so many feet of height. Do I see 2 nods there? So I have 3. And Lisa's got 3, so we're good. Okay.
All right, so we'll move those ahead. Thanks, that's it.
All right. Yeah, dinner is served, and we're going to reconvene. We're going to try to get as close to 7:15 as possible, so I apologize, but yeah. So thank you all very much.